You've mentioned now sediment layers and Noah's flood, and that tends to go hand in hand with creation. What exactly was Noah's flood?
Well, Noah's flood, as described in the Bible, was a worldwide cataclysmic event where the entire earth was covered by water, and all the way up to the tippy toppest of the mountains at the time, everything was covered in water, and that was a judgment of God on the people at the time, and every land-based animal died in that flood except for the kinds that God brought to the ark for basically to go on with Noah and his family during the time of the flood. So the idea that again, it's written, that information, that story is not written. It's not an allegory. It's written as it was, as actual historical text, and just like Genesis was. So you can choose not to believe that is an actual story that occurred. The problem is if you choose not to believe something that is written as if it actually occurred, then what else do you believe? Why would you believe anything else in the Bible that's written in the same kind of form of text? This is history. This is prose written to reflect actual history. If you choose not to believe that, why would you believe anything else? So we get down that rabbit hole again, but that's not where I want to go. So the idea then is that the flood during that time, this was a cataclysmic event. The way it's described, the waters of the deep opened up. That's one thing that there's a frequent argument that there's not enough water to cover the earth to cover all of the land of the earth. That's actually false. There's plenty of water both in the oceans and in the deep earth reservoirs, that if all of that is unleashed, it would cover the earth. That is secular study, by the way. That's not it's not Christian. That's not Christian creationism propaganda. That's actual research and studies that have been done and published in secular journals. And so the idea is, and the other thing to keep in mind is, there's nothing that says that what the earth looked like before the flood is what it looked like now. And so it's not unreasonable to postulate, again, we don't, the Bible is not a geography manual, nor is it a science book, but it does say things that we can take into our models and account for. But there's nothing in the Bible that says that we had mountains that were several miles high. There's nothing that said that we had ocean floors that were several miles high before the flood. And so the other thing that goes along with that pre-flood model is that the land masses weren't quite as high as they are now, and the oceans weren't quite as deep. Both of those things together would require less water to cover the earth. But even without that, there's still enough water to cover the earth. So these are things just to keep in mind that we frequently think, well, if you really believe in the flood, well, the pre-flood world must have looked like it does now. There's nothing that says that it does. So during this very cataclysmic time of events, as the aquifers of the deep were opened, there was cataclysmic movement of sediment throughout the world. Unimaginable amounts of sediment, so that in the creation model, the biblical creation model, most of the fossil layers, almost all of the fossil layers, almost all of the sedimentary layers were formed during and immediately after the flood. It kind of as everything was settling and the flood waters were receding. That's when all of this stuff was kind of settling and squishing down on itself, so to speak. And so that's how all of the sedimentary layers around the world were created. And it's interesting that when you read the Bible and understand it as such, you're not surprised, and in fact, you would predict that you would find aquatic organisms in the mountains. And we have, there are tons and tons of aquatic fossils in the highest mountains in the Andes and the Himalayas and everywhere else. There are plenty of aquatic organisms that are normally found in the ocean that are on these land masses. Yes, the naturalism model says that those areas were once underground too, but they subsequently lifted. So it's there's explanations in both models, but there was a prediction of the creation model that you would actually find that. And having a scientific model that can predict observations into the future is a very powerful model. Having a model that you constantly have to rejigger to account for new findings is not a very strong model, and that's pretty much the definition of the evolution model over the last 100 years. There's constant finds that cause the model to be rejiggered or are completely unexplainable by the model, such as soft tissues and fossils. So that is one evidence that we would predict to see that. And then the other evidence is that there are layers. We find similar rock layers, similar sedimentary layers all over the globe in all the continents, and it looks like they were. If you didn't know any better, if you thought you were smarter than God, you would look at these and say, wow, these all look kind of like contiguous layers, like they are, that they were all formed at the same time, kind of in the same process. Again, another scientific observation that is predicted by the creation model, but not predicted by the evolution model. So there are many of these things that we see in geology that, if you're open to the actual meaning of them, to an alternative interpretation that is highly consistent with the data, you realize that interpreting the flood as an actual worldwide cataclysmic event is highly supported by the available data.